Hello! Welcome to Teach Me Maths. My name is Jonathan Hicks and we're converting between fractions, decimals and percentages. Now, fractions, decimals and percentages are all essentially the same thing. They're just different ways of representing parts of a whole. Let me draw a couple of scales up on here and I'll explain what I mean. So I'm going to actually represent both the fractions and the decimals on the same scale here. So we'll have 0 at one end and 1 at the other end. So if you're halfway along this scale, as a fraction, that's a half obviously, and as a decimal that's going to be 0.5. Yeah, those are the two ways of representing the same thing, the same part of the whole. If you had a quarter here, that's going to be 0.25. If you had 3/4 here, that's going to be 0.75. Now I've actually done two separate videos for converting between fractions and decimals. One converting fractions into decimals, another one going the other way around. And you need to know how to do that first. Those two conversions are probably the most difficult of the different conversions you can do, so that's why I've put them in separate videos. Make sure you're familiar with those. If you're not, pause this video, go and watch those first, and then come back here. All right. The main thing I want you to realize here is that this scale goes from 0 to 1. Fractions and decimals both range from 0 to 1. Because percentages are different. If I do the same scale for percentages, you'd have 0% at one end, but at the other end, when you've got a whole one, as a percentage that would be 100%. So whereas fractions and decimals go from 0 to 1, percentages go 0 to 100. If you've got a half as a percentage, that's going to be 50%. A quarter as a percentage is 25%, 3/4 is 75%, etc. And the point is that because percentages range from 0 to 100 and fractions and decimals go from 0 to 1, all percentages are 100 times bigger than the fraction and decimal equivalent. So if you take a fraction or a decimal and times it by 100, you find the percentage equivalent. And if you take the percentage and divide it by 100, you're going to get the fraction or decimal equivalent. Right, just give me a second to rub this out and I'm going to draw a little diagram up to summarise that, and then we'll run through a few examples. Alright, so we've got fractions and decimals on the one hand over here which range between 0 and 1, and percentages over here that range between 0 and 100% when you've got a whole one. So if you want to convert a fraction or a decimal into a percentage, because it's 100 times bigger, you just times by 100. That's it. So for either of these situations, going to a percentage, you times by 100, because they're 100 times bigger. If you're starting with a percentage and you want to go back to a fraction or a decimal, you do the opposite. You divide by 100. Because these are 100 times smaller, going this way, we're going to divide by 100. And in terms of converting between fractions or decimals and percentages, that's all you really need to know. Fractions or decimals to percentages, we times by 100. Back from percentages to a fraction or decimal, we divide by 100. The rest of it is just arithmetic. It's just multiplying, dividing, working out what you've got. That's the key concept you've got to get straight in your head. If you can remember that, the rest of it should be reasonably straightforward. Now, there's effectively 4 different conversions you have to do here. So you've got fractions into percentages, that way. Percentages back into fractions is our second one. You've got decimals into percentages is the third one, and percentages back into decimals is the fourth one. So there are 4 different kinds of conversions you can do here. Because you already know how to convert fractions into decimals, don't you? Having watched the previous videos. So what I'm going to do is give you one example of each of those 4 different conversions and show you how to do it, and then you've got the lot. Now, converting between decimals and percentages are the easiest, so I'm going to start with those. So if we had 0.46, let's say, as a decimal number, and we want to convert that into a percentage, well, percentages are 100 times bigger, so we times by 100. So times that by 100. As a percentage, you just move the decimal point, if you're timesing by 100, 2 times to the right. So that's going to give you 46%. That's it. Yeah, so you just move the decimal point 2 places to the right, because you've got to times by 100. If you've got a percentage, let's say you've got 58.2%, and you want to convert that back into a decimal, well, you go in the opposite way, so you divide by 100, because decimals are out of 1, percentages are out of 100. So you're just going to do the opposite of timesing by 100, you're going to divide by 100, so you're just going to move the decimal point 2 places in the other direction. So 1, 2, it's going to be 0.582. So as a decimal number, that's just 0.582. Just be aware that percentages can sometimes have decimal parts to them, but that's still a percentage of the whole 100%. Yeah, you've got 58.2% of the whole lot. Whereas this is the decimal version now, the equivalent of this percentage, which is now measured out of 1. So you can have decimal percentages, don't get confused with that. This is the percentage out of 100%, this is the decimal out of 1. So that's converting between decimals and percentages. Now we just need to do fractions and percentages. Now if you've got a percentage and you want to convert it back into a fraction, that's very easy to do as long as you know what a percentage is. So if you've got 80%, for example, well, by definition, any percentage is a fraction out of 100. So if you want to convert a percentage into a fraction, you just write it over 100. That's it. Remember though, you must always cancel your fractions down. In this case, 80 over 100 will cancel down into 4/5. So that's converting percentages into fractions. So the last one we've got to do is converting fractions into percentages. And this is the hard one. And for this reason, what I recommend you do is actually start off by converting the fraction into a decimal and then convert the decimal into a percentage. Because converting a decimal into a percentage is easy, and you should already know how to convert a fraction into a decimal. So I'll do a quick example now. Now when I did the converting fractions into decimals video, we had an example of 3/8. And we found when we converted that into a decimal, we got 0.375. If you want to know how to do that, as I say, go and watch the converting fractions into decimals videos. It's important that you know how to do that. But once you've converted the fraction into the decimal, to convert the decimal into a percentage, just like we do here, we multiply by 100, so we're going to move the decimal point 2 places to the right. So as a percentage, that will be 37.5%. Again, don't get confused with the decimal parts in here. This is a percentage, which happens to be a decimal number, but this is the decimal equivalent of that percentage. This is out of 1, the fraction is out of 1, the percentage, 37.5%, will be out of 100% as the whole one. So those are the 4 different types. Yeah. So very quickly, 2 separate videos for converting between fractions and decimals. Those are the hard ones, you need to learn those separately. But going to a percentage or back to a percentage, because percentages are 100 times bigger, you times by 100 when you're going to a percentage, divide by 100 when you're coming back from a percentage. And those are the 4 possible combinations, the different conversions you might have to do. My name is Jonathan Hicks and you're watching Teach Me Maths.